Hi, welcome. I'm Chris Salt, and here I am again sitting on the Bakehouse stage. First, Moniza, Pakistani British poet, a writer whose work I've long admired. Her first collection, The Country on My Shoulder, Oxford University Press, shortlisted for the T.S. Eliot and the Whitbread Prizes. Europa, published by Blood Axe, and at the time of partition, also Blood Axe, were both Poetry Book Society choices, also shortlisted for the T.S. Eliot, and she received the Chumley Award for her poetry in 2002. Not only, but also ... Now Caroline's most recent book is the Immigration Handbook, published by Heron, shortlisted also for the Ted Hughes in 2016, been translated into Italian, and is rooted in her work as an immigration caseworker for a London MP, who I think she's quite familiar with. So reviews for that have been absolutely fabulous. And she's also won prizes in the prestigious Troubadour Competition. Moniza Alvi and Caroline Smith.
Thank you very much, Chris, for inviting us to the Bakehouse. And it's a great pleasure for me to be reading with Caroline for the second time. I'm going to read some new work in this half. A schoolgirl, Feroz, has become susceptible to extremism. She wants to find out why people do what they do. It's a sequence of poems, a long sequence. Feroz has met Tahir online, a man who holds extremist views, and here he wants to marry her, and they're watching an online ceremony. And there's a fairy tale aspect to the sequence. The internet is a wood, for example. The bride. She knows about it now. This marriage in the woods must be valid, all in one sitting, with a vali and witnesses gathered around, and with no interruptions, not a nightbird's hoot. The couple sufficiently lit. I love you, Feroz. Well, what do you think? In the semi-dark of the twisting paths, a man is marrying a girl. How young is she? Hard to tell. Why is she looking down? For now and for the afterlife. Her dress is so heavy and the wood is tangled. Tahir has introduced Feroz to a member of his group who proposes a job for her. A task. Can you sew? Asked the woman in the wood. I believe you can. Not a button, not a shirt, a jacket or a dress. Can you sew a vest? I know you're skilled enough with Allah on your side to do a good, neat, lasting job. It's not just women's work, it's for our cause, you know. I'll give you strong thread to feed through the empty eye of a silver needle. Can you stitch life to death and pull the thread tight? A few sharp tugs and that's it. An honourable thing, this sewing. And Feroz again. Gone. Like a strip of land, a swathe of forest, has she gone? She hasn't gone abroad or travelled very far at all. She quarrels with her sister, eats dal and rice and sleeps at home. She says her prayers. She takes the normal route to school where she goes drifting out. The teachers say, "Is something wrong? We're here if you want to talk to us." Her friends, she's let them slip away. She's on her phone upstairs, her school bag unopened on the floor. She's edging out of one story, looking both ways, not looking. She hasn't left, but she has gone. In the darkness of the wood, Tahir has urged Feroz to watch a video clip. The viewing. She clicks play. 2, lit up. An axeman, a prisoner, shadowy others, tall trees spaced. Axe swings to neck. She clicks pause. A loneliness. She clicks play. Sees it. Seen it. Sees it. Dark now. God and the devil feature in sequence as a kind of chorus and sparring with each other. The contest. God held one end of the argument and the devil the other. They heaved and strained, but nothing ever moved much. The two of them locked in a tug of war, the rope they couldn't drop. And now a CCTV camera shows something a bit suspicious. The eye. Oh, hardware shop. Oh, faithful eye. Has it seen anything unusual? The hardware shop is dark and so densely forested. How can the recording eye see? But it does. It's well trained. The forester is quick and deliberate. The hammers are ranged like strong-beaked birds on the bristling wall rack. A claw hammer, that's it, and a club hammer, drops them into the open cage of his basket, adds long nails, hurries to the wooden counter. Something not right. He's too intent, no glancing around. Someone wants to hammer a nail through the universe. Does the eye weep? The eye is dispassionate. There are some snatches of dialogue in this. Tahir says, Feroz, let's get married like I say, be strong together. I keep picturing paradise and praying, you're my reward, huh? So what do you reckon about being my wife, a proper wife? And Feroz answers, a wife? A proper wife, leaving home and doing what married people do? And Tahir, of course, what else? Living together, our home. I can picture it easily. I'd really like that. And the playground rhyme, cherry stones, tinker, tailor, martyr, sailor, rich or poor or very poor, west or east or in between, woman beater, freedom fighter, bomb maker, this life, next life, sometime never. Feroz is at school, looking out of the window, and we have her thoughts, and the teacher's voice breaks in. Classroom scorpions. Out of the big smeary window, the city and more of it, a grey sea, so quiet from up here, like empty. Note what Macbeth says to Lady Macbeth, page 93, Act 3, Scene 2, line 36. Found it, Feroz? Oh, full of scorpions is my mind, dear wife. And thank you. And now it's my great pleasure to hand over to Caroline.
Thank you. Thanks, Chris. It's lovely to be reading here with Moniza, and that's brilliant work, Moniza. Really enjoyed that. And I can't wait to hear all the poets in the second half. I'm going to start by reading from my book, The Immigration Handbook, which published by Seren. And for me, poetry and art have always been at the heart of life, and I wanted to use my experience working with asylum seekers to try and help change the climate of debate about immigration, to show the human beings behind the statistics. And in the poems, I often take forms and fragments of stories and letters and weave them into the poems. And this poem is the name of a form. It's a form given to someone with temporary admission, which basically treats them as if they have never landed. People can languish in this state for years and years with no rights and ability to integrate, a sort of lockdown without any end. IS 96. The refusal notice told him he was appeal rights exhausted. He was. After 11 years on temporary admission, like a shipwrecked survivor staggering up the shore, he'd collapsed on the tide's edge to the boom of the sea and the cry of the gulls. With each new refusal, he'd felt the sinking pull and roll of pebbles shifting beneath him, dragging him back out to sea. But as year followed year, and they never made him leave, his fragile hope took root, lacing the bleached crowns of matted grass to the quiet lee side of the dunes among the flat violet stones and brittle bundles of seaweed that drifted across the paths of half-buried sleepers. Sometimes people are fleeing from such awful events that in order to make the present bearable, they have to decide what they want to take from the past and how they want to remember things. This poem's called Lime Tree Honey. All she brought with her from that other life in the DDR was a dill pickle jar filled with honey made by his bees from trees in the Unter den Linden. It would remain unopened, a jar of time that could not change, but that preserved one day in their life together as she had decided to remember it. The honey held the burnished light of an early morning leaving East Berlin to take the swarm to the countryside to pollinate an orchard. It held the cobbled roads of the hamlets they had meandered through, the scent of flowering beans through the open windows, stalks of chaff that blew round the car, the back of the old hatchback bumping and scraping low behind them with the packed hives shifting and the restless hum of the bees. In the shock that had enveloped her after the release of her file and the discovery of her husband's meticulous notes on her life, she had searched back as she prepared to leave Germany for signs of his affection, some drop of sweetness she could extract from those years. Navigating the immigration system is a bureaucratic and soul-destroying and unforgiving process for already very vulnerable people. And the next poem is about the consequences of one forgotten mistake in a woman's past. It's called The Jumper. She remembered those first weeks training as a nurse in a foreign land, homesick, cold, how she missed her family, how she had been tempted, all the colours, beautiful designs, and how she'd slipped one into her bag, how she'd been caught but thought the judge had been kind, how her family had come to join her, their excitement, their first days at school, how they had flourished, how she never told them, how she'd forgotten until now when the letter came, refusing them all because of her criminal act, how she couldn't explain to her children, how she could see no other way, how without her they would be allowed to stay. All the poems contain a truth about the immigration system, and this next one is about appearance and reality. The Home Office uses language that appears neutral or even friendly, but it's often done to disguise their true intentions, a deception, I think, that has historical resonance. It's called Selection. He was quietly hopeful when he got the letter that said his case had been selected for progression, that he would be allowed to stay. But then a second had arrived, an invitation to a service event, and he was suspicious. No, too much activity, this sudden attention to him. He was scared. It was as if, after all these years of hiding, he would finally be led out with the other men and boys through the fringe of sunlight from the gloom of the pine forest, his hands clasped behind his head. I think many of us were inspired by what happened in Glasgow a couple of weeks ago. And this poem is a celebration of the power of neighbours and giving a helping hand. It's called Heron Flats. As you push a leaflet through a letterbox, Abdul Rahman dashes out to petition the case of Zhang Li, who's been sleeping on his sofa for the past 2 years. You ease off the messenger bag and sit and take tea with him on the balcony. You know Abdul, a serial letter writer in green ink. He arranges mint leaves in glasses and you watch them twist and melt like fur caterpillars as you sip on this Sunday afternoon, up here where the North Circular is constant as the ocean, and next door's finches, dyed to the colour of flamingos, squall in their rows of cages. What you didn't know was how hard it was when he first came to England in 1964 to get a job, and how many letters he'd written, and how he'd got no replies, and then how one day he got an interview for a position as clerk at TL Holdings, and how, when he'd got there, he'd found 3 other candidates, all foreigners like him, and how his boss, Ray Watkins, had taken them all. There's so much chance and randomness in the asylum system. 2 brothers with the same circumstances, one granted leave to stay, the other refused. A baby born one day outside an amnesty, which would have allowed the whole family to stay. This poem is set on Christmas Eve because immigration officers often choose days when they think the migrants' lawyers won't be working to deport people. It's called Luck. A sudden deep snowfall has grounded all flights. Mr. Owuzu's deportation that we fought so hard against is unexpectedly cancelled. Our faces are grey and wrinkled against the brightness of snow. Boots creak and squeal in the thick silence as we decide to walk these country lanes, quiet again, as when my mother and her father, evacuees from the bombs of London, once cycled under the jumbled hedgerows, alive with birds and berries, heading for the canal, fishing rods strapped to their backs. One day, they caught a large perch and wrapped it in wet newspaper to take back for supper. She carried it in her basket for the long cycle home. It was still alive when they got there, to their rooms above the post office, where my mother, afraid to sleep, would read under the streetlight. They put the perch in the sink, and the next day cycled all the way back to the canal and let it go. They figured it had somehow deserved its luck. Where I live and work in Wembley, there are lots of HMOs, houses in multiple occupation, and a large transient community. This last poem I'll read in this set is a sort of bridge to my new work I'll read after Moniza's read again, which is about dementia and the aging process. It's called Removal. Landlords are shifting out old tenants. It's the season of mattresses. Checked, stained, they're dumped in the road overnight. Cramped in half, their split seams erupt yellow foam like crops of toadstools under this grey wash of a Saturday autumn sky. A piece of dark cloth is tacked to the window of this maisonette my pregnant friend is viewing to buy, her first home. The tenant has been issued a Section 21 and won't answer the door, so we could only get access now the owner is swept in to open up. The tenant follows us from room to room, leaning her cheek against the door frame, watching. It's the same stare I saw on my father's ivory face. I was digging up plants from his garden. He had agreed I could, after finally accepting he had to move. I thought he was asleep, but he'd followed me out, shuffling slowly after me. He stood balancing with his 2 sticks, just watching from a distance, from the middle of the path. Thanks.
I've just unmuted. Thank you very much, Caroline. It's very nice to think of you all quietly out there listening to us. In this second part, I'm going to continue in a way with the theme of migration of refugees that Caroline has so brilliantly established. This is based on my family story. 1947, the partition of India and Pakistan. As you no doubt know, thousands were killed in the civil unrest and millions were displaced. My Pakistani grandmother, who was a widow at the time, made the crossing from Ludhiana in India to Lahore in the new Pakistan with 5 of her children. It was only a few years ago that I learned that my father had a brother, a young man, his name was Atta, who'd suffered brain damage as a child as a result of a childhood accident. And he disappeared, this young man who's about 20, he disappeared during the crossing, never to be found again. And this was the fate of many vulnerable adults and children at that time. So I'm going to read from At the Time of Partition, which is a book-length poem in sections, and it's a version of what might have taken place in my imagination. It did bring up difficult moral questions about what was it my right for me to make my uncle visible and to take on the story and to incorporate him in the poem. So I'm going to read a few excerpts, and this is from part 1, The Line, which is the line of partition. Lawyer Sir Cyril Radcliffe was called in from England to draw up the line of partition. He didn't know anything about India, so he was thought to be perfect for the job, impartial. Sir Cyril Radcliffe finalised the line. He did it as fast as he was able, in the time it takes to sort out a school timetable. A line so delicate, a sparrow might have picked it up in its beak. Not an artist's line or a line of writing. A line between birth and non-being. A line that would mean death for so many. The land itself, at its calmest and most dignified, yielded to the line, lay still, it didn't know what was coming. India and Pakistan. The countries required their boundaries as the thirsty needed water, the beggars their begging bowls. The line was its own religion. It seemed to have its own God. It sliced through a village, cut a house in half. Where to place it in all of reality? India will awaken, but for my grandmother, India draws away irretrievably, like the tide going out. Moving on a bit here, my grandmother and her family are considering whether to leave for the newly created Pakistan. And as I write, I put myself more and more in her shoes. Must we go? To place myself in my grandmother's shoes, her chappals paired in the bedroom cool, the mahogany dark, lying on the prayer mat facing Mecca, awaiting her smaller, browner feet to plant my feet there or here in a line of words securely on the page. To move house is one thing, to leave your country another, but to leave it because it no longer wishes to attach itself to you, doesn't at all desire to be the ground under your feet, to feel compelled to leave it for one which you had always known to be a corner of your own, but which has startlingly, deliriously become another, and which beckons as if it had a hand to beckon with, and which calls you as if a country had a single voice. Amma, they demand, her protesting children. Amma, must we go? Can I take my cricket bat to Pakistan? And what about school? Only Atta has no questions. The cards have been dealt by a firm, if not a sure hand. Ludhiana to India, West Punjab to Pakistan, East Bengal to Pakistan, Amritsar to India, Srinagar to India, Lahore to Pakistan. The empire held fast like a sheet and shook out. Doubt was an awkward thing. There was no room for doubt. At the margin of the great convulsion, her small household convulsed. Pakistan was what it amounted to. Pakistan, in the salting of lassi, in the knuckle dents in dough, Pakistan, in the pleating of a sari, in the sweeping of the hallway, Pakistan, between the question and its answer, Pakistan. Rumours flew on the wind, nails of steel on the wind, infidels, rapists. Honour was the jewel, not mother, sister. To save their honour, bonfires were lit and the women burned. They asked me to do this, but I ran away. I couldn't set fire to my sister. To protect their honour, 90 women jumped into a well. There wasn't enough water to drown them all. And the rumour of a rumour, and the acting on a rumour, and the kernel of a rumour. The wisdom was to go. Departure, the desperate, the unimaginable thing. Already her neighbourhood was emptying. Whole families had stolen away. Which way to face? She wrote to her son in England, I pray for our safety at this time. We will go by bus to Lahore. I imagine for them a less perilous journey, better by far. By bus, better by far, a magic carpet, finely knotted, richer than blood, broad enough to keep the family together, islanded, apart from every danger, journeying smoothly across the unsegmented sky, not in the cauldron of summer, but in the fresher feel of the last of winter, the lucid mornings, the greeny tinge of the evening air, Nero to wave them on and Gina to welcome them. My grandmother, her pots and pans, her lamp close by, her parcels of layered clothes like mattresses, Ahmed and Atta jostling for space, Rahila, Jamila, Shahana, the little sisters, a conspiracy of 3, with names like mine all ending in A, young girls, cross-legged, daydreaming, disentangling hello and goodbye. I'm fast forwarding now to the middle of the story. My family, they stayed for some months in a refugee camp before being rehoused in Lahore. And I wondered if it was in the camp where my grandmother might have realised that her son was missing. He had been entrusted for the journey to friends of the family. So this is from the camp. And now, having come so far, I'll press on as she couldn't press on. And imagine it was here she found out, indelibly here, that there was to be no smooth return. We're sorry, they said, the friends of friends. So very sorry. He isn't with us. He disappeared at, he vanished between. The last time we saw him, we did what we could. Sorry, we're so very sorry. And at dusk, his name sounded in the mile-long roll call of the missing brothers, sons, aunts, fathers, daughters, especially daughters missing. Debas, Daras, Kashibas, Kalsums, Bakairas, Myras, Baheras, Yasminas, Maroons, daughters missing, utter missing. And there was forever someone who thought they'd seen them or knew someone, had a brother or an uncle or a mother-in-law who had seen or had heard something, seen utter or someone just like him. So you thought you saw him. Where? Tell me again. Why did I? Why didn't they? A young man so doubly lost, knowing no better, had he wandered off? Would people be kind? The darkness fell, swooped as darkness does. Finally, I'll just read a bit from a section towards the end where Utter is still missing. The family has the offer of a house in Lahore. No fruit but the offer of a house or part of one. Not like for like, the building shared. No veranda, no garden with hibiscus in a border. No almond trees. A house neither old nor new, tucked away behind the bazaar, leaning into a yellow courtyard, its entrance on a narrow lane. Amma, this will do. Acha, acha, yes, this will do. Or just to say that a Hindu family would have, made the journey in the other direction from this house. They moved like trespassers through the rooms of orphaned furniture, claimed chests of drawers, the shelves of the almirahs, removed saris and underskirts, sleeveless pullovers, shirts, shalwars, and replaced them with their own. Tried all the beds, were they softer, harder? Inspected the kitchen, the bags of lentils, flour, opened and unopened, the tava in place on the stove, waiting for the moons of roti. And they noted in the darkened living room the number and position of chairs, everything as it was when a family mirroring their own had grasped the future and fled. Thanks. Over to Caroline now, and I look forward to hearing you and everybody else afterwards.
Thanks so much. My father will be 90 this year and my mother 89, and I've begun, too late of course, to try and capture their lives. And over the last few years, as my parents decline, I've witnessed their aging and struggled to uncover their stories, just as age and dementia are pulling them further away from me. This first poem is called Archaeology. When I first went to Germany after the war, I was quite shy and got bullied a lot. His opening halts me like an old sign marooned in the middle of a field. I can find no way past it, no layout of roads it once connected to. I'm asking my father about his national service. But I know this story, the one he'll slip into telling, how he once stood up to the popular bully on the RAF base and challenged him to a fight, and how, when they finally called a truce, they shook hands and became the best of friends. I feel like an interrogator trying to establish who, 70 years ago, he really is. It's a great story, but there's always been something about it, of the boy's own tales he'd tell me as a child, the unlikely hero who'd pull through, and right would always win. Some days it seems there is just an outline left of what shaped his life. A few bricks covered in green moss. They could be significant, or just a wall. One of the stories I did manage to uncover as I dug deep into my family's memories was this tale about my father's great aunt. It's called Ellen Maude Smith. There was no music at her brief committal. 7 in attendance, 2 nurses and us, in the small church in the Essex village where Ellen was born and lived all her life. The only daughter amid 6 sons, she'd cared for her parents and her last brother, and then, when none of the village boys came back from the war, lived on in the dwelling sunk behind a now busy road, among cow parsley and tottering beehives. She'd often tell of the day she won first prize at the singing gala in the summer church fete, how she'd sung Ave Maria in her bonnet and ribbons, her voice sweet as a green linnet above the upturned faces of that afternoon. How she'd skipped home in the cooling sun, black blue swallows skimming evening insects off the long pale grass, the lights coming on in the village, and her whole life ahead. As a mother, I've long been used to dealing with unruly children. What I didn't expect was that once they'd grown up, I'd have to start all over again with my father. This poem is called Boat Trip. Eventually, we get Dad down into the boat, where he loudly invites all the elderly ladies to a seat on his lap. As the benches are so squashed. He's talking too much. It's the joy of a captive audience. But he's been off the boards too long and needs to rediscover his art. The boat swivels off in a flourish, a dark caliper of water widening from his stage and him spotlit in the column of sun. He jokes that I will steal the water spaniel's muzzle to put on him, but his words come out jumbled, and all the owner hears is, "She's going to steal your dog." I look for something to distract him, but the landscape is still and serene, just waders stalking the estuary shoreline, prodding and stuttering the mud. Geese are hawking from distant fields as a whine of swan's wings grinds overhead like some creaking stage machinery wound with old handles, and it's all become part of Dad's impromptu vaudeville act. He's animated, and as we finally dock, I'm reluctant to pull him away. But like an old sly dog, yanking his lead to snatch at a crimson chicken bone, he twists out of his collar and turns back for an encore. My parents left it too late to move from the home they loved, but where they had struggled to cope. This next poem is called Cold. It's 2 winters ago. It's freezing, and their heating has broken down again. I clunk up the latch to the back door. The house is colder inside than out. I set to work shoveling the thick fleece of ash from the hearth and prop up the half-burnt logs with their satin sheen of hooded crows. That winter had tested them. Their strategies for survival had become visible. Pliers were left out to peel back yogurt pot lids. We found Dad climbing the steep stairs with the dog lead clipped, one end to his belt, the other to the banister. Cushions arranged over soiled sheets. I tramped over the glassy path in the bright cold and searched for logs, dragging back through the garden branches of shimmering copper leaves. It was dark when I'd left them, wrapped in blankets in front of a fire. As I made it down the path and my eyes adjusted, I looked back across the white ground to the strip of light under their door and the pair of shoes placed neatly outside. The next poem is called Twin Tub, and for any millennials in the audience, it is an old-fashioned washing machine, not an ice cream. Twin Tub. Anxious, just home from school, I'd push open the back door into the cloy of soapy stewing clothes, the fug and noise of the twin tub pulled out into the middle of the kitchen. And my mother, unfamiliar as she hauled hot plats of shirts into the spinner with bleached silver driftwood tongs. She was always stern on wash days, as she is now, her strained face watching Dad stooped over the washing machine, struggling to open the door and push his wet trousers in with the butt of his stick. She refuses to do it for him because he refuses to wear pads. When we did finally manage to move my parents, my father declined very rapidly. This poem is called Beds. We, indignant, reproachful, outraged, our parents had slept in the same bed together for 66 years. The estate agent lay down on the floor in the quirky-shaped bedroom to prove it would take a double bed. But now we've moved Mum into a single bed in the living room because Dad shouts out all night. And social services have moved in a hospital bed with a hoist. Dad's lifted it in and out of it in a builder's sack, like a cubic measurement of sand. Dementia is a cruel disease. It doesn't just affect people's memory, but it can often seem to change aspects of their character, and that can be incredibly distressing. This poem's called Disorientation. My father is using different techniques to get me to take him home. Some days he shouts, others he pleads. Today, it's the sales patter he wants me to fall for, the road contractor with the excess shingle to offload on a Friday night in a quick, grubby deal. He's in a blustering hurry, too eager, becoming belligerent. Look, if you take me home now before it gets dark, you can be back in time for tea. He pushes hard with his offer. Just get the keys, will you? He's unstrapped his chair. Already tipping up his lorry in the driveway, he's breathing the coarse scrape of a spade in the scrunch of orange shingle. And I'll finish with this last poem, which is called Margate. In summer, we went to the seaside on a double-decker train. I lay under the deck chairs beneath the massive shapes of my grandparents' oblong rumps, a row of them pressing through the canvas, blocking the sun. I doodle my fingers through the silk pools of grey sand, cool in the shady patches under the seats where I lay hidden among the toe-stubbing struts, half-buried, lopsided by their weight, watching the sun dappling through the gaps. We would linger until evening, when the dark would come down in blocks suddenly. Time to drag our cold towels, coated and heavy as wet-breaded fish, accelerating our pace through the sinking, shadowy sand, the sharp spikes of marram, the nails of shell and black twists of bladderwort, crisp as lamb's umbilical cords, the day's spell broken. Anxious then, as I am now, hurrying across a causeway to get back to you while there's still time. Thank you very much.